worst mistake of Officer Kevin Miller's 15-year career wasn't pulling over the sleek, dark sedan for a rolling stop that never happened. It wasn't the sneer he couldn't hide as the driver's window glided down, or the condescending tone he used, a weapon he'd sharpened on countless others. His worst mistake was a single, dismissive assumption. He looked at the black woman behind the wheel, her hair in intricate braids, her clothes stylish but unassuming, and saw a target. He saw someone he could belittle, someone whose day he could ruin to feel a flicker of power. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the federal agent meticulously cataloging his every word, every gesture, and every violation of protocol. He thought he was the predator. He was about to become the prey. The city of Oak Creek was a tapestry of contradictions. On the north side, manicured lawns and historic brownstones whispered of old money and quiet influence. On the south, vibrant communities buzzed with life, color, and the constant hum of resilience. The line between them was a highway, a concrete river that everyone crossed but few truly bridged. It was on a quiet, tree-lined street on the north side, just 3 blocks from that dividing highway, that it all began. Dr. Anya Williams, or as she was known in this temporary, carefully constructed life, parked her Audi A6 outside a small, independent coffee shop called The Daily Grind. To any observer, she was the picture of success, a sociologist from a Chicago university on a research sabbatical, studying the socio-economic dynamics of mid-sized American cities. She was dressed in dark jeans, a simple gray cashmere sweater, and clean white sneakers. The car was a necessary part of the cover, a vehicle that blended in with the affluence of the North Side, allowing her to move without raising immediate suspicion. In reality, her name was Special Agent Maya Roberts of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The sociology research was a cover for a far more dangerous study, a deep dive investigation into a corrupt faction within the Oak Creek Police Department suspected of facilitating a major drug trafficking operation. For 6 months, Maya had lived and breathed the role of Ania, embedding herself in the community, attending town halls, interviewing local leaders, and building a pattern of life that was impeccably, boringly academic. Her real work happened late at night, in a sterile, temporary field office, where she and her team pieced together whispers, financial records, and surveillance data. They had a ghost, a shadowy figure within the OCPD, codenamed Cerberus, who was rumored to be the gatekeeper, ensuring police patrols were conveniently absent when multi-million-dollar shipments of fentanyl and cocaine moved through the city's arteries. Finding Cerberus was Maya's mission. That Tuesday morning, however, she was just Anaya, craving a good latte. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn. As she stepped out of her car, she fed the meter, her movements fluid and economical. She was about to cross the street when a squad car, OCPD Unit 27, cruised past. The officer in the passenger seat, a young man with a fresh face, barely glanced her way. But the driver, a man with a thick neck and a face set in a permanent scowl, slowed the vehicle. His eyes, small and hard, swept over her, then lingered on the Audi. Maya felt the familiar prickle of a professional gaze. But this was different. It wasn't analytical. It was proprietary, judgmental. She met his stare for a brief second, her expression neutral, before turning and entering the coffee shop. She ignored it. She had to. In her line of work, you couldn't afford to be provoked by every flicker of prejudice. It was data, just another variable in the complex equation of human behavior. But it was a data point she filed away. The driver of Unit 27. 15 minutes later, latte in hand, she was back in her car, ready to head to the university library to maintain her cover. She buckled her seatbelt, started the engine, and checked her mirrors. Pulling out into the sparse traffic, she signaled and drove, keeping her speed precisely at the posted 25-mile-per-hour limit. She was 2 blocks away when the world behind her dissolved into a strobing cascade of red and blue light. Her heart didn't leap. Her breath didn't catch. Years of training kicked in, smothering the flash of adrenaline with a cold blanket of procedure. She glanced at her speedometer, 25 miles per hour. She mentally replayed her last 2 minutes of driving, a perfect, by-the-book departure. This was not a legitimate stop. Slowing down, she pulled over to the curb, the siren whooping once before falling silent, leaving only the rhythmic flashing of the lights. She put the car in park, turned off the radio, and rolled down her window just enough to speak through. She placed her hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel, visible and non-threatening. She waited. The driver's side door of Unit 27 opened, and the officer she'd seen earlier emerged. He was a bull of a man, mid-40s, with a swagger that seemed to strain the fabric of his uniform. His name tag read K. Miller. He approached her car not with the cautious readiness of an officer on an unknown stop, but with the leisurely stroll of a man who already knew how this was going to end. Officer Kevin Miller tapped on the driver's side window with a thick knuckle, a gesture of impatience despite the fact it was already partially down. "All the way," he commanded, his voice a low gravel. Maya complied, the window gliding silently into the door. She kept her hands on the wheel. "Good morning, officer," she said, her tone even and respectful. "Is there a problem?" Miller leaned down, his face filling the open window. The smell of stale coffee and self-satisfaction wafted in. He ignored her question, his eyes doing another slow, insulting inventory, from her face to her clothes to the leather interior of the car. "License and registration," he grunted, not as a request, but as a demand. "Of course." Maya kept her movements deliberate and slow. She reached for the glove compartment with her right hand. "I'm just reaching for my registration now, officer." "Just do it," he snapped. His partner, Officer Peterson, had now exited the passenger side and taken up a position near the rear of the Audi, his hand resting on his service weapon. He was younger, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes kept darting between Miller and Maya, a subtle tension in his posture. Maya handed over her driver's license, her meticulously crafted Ania Williams ID, and the car's registration. Miller snatched them from her hand. He glanced at the license, a smirk playing on his lips. "Dr. Ania Williams," he read aloud, drawing out the title with mocking reverence. "A doctor, huh? What are you a doctor of? Spinning records?" The insult was so juvenile it was almost laughable. Maya maintained her composure. "Sociology," she replied calmly. "I'm a visiting professor at Oak Creek University." "Right. A professor driving a $60,000 car in this neighborhood. Story checks out," Miller sneered, the sarcasm thick as tar. He turned the documents over in his hand as if searching for a hidden flaw. "You know why I pulled you over, doctor?" "I'm afraid I don't, officer. I was driving at the speed limit." "You rolled that stop sign back there at Elm Street," he said, pointing vaguely behind him with his thumb. "Flew right through it." It was a blatant lie. She had come to a complete 3-second stop. It was a habit ingrained from years of surveillance driving. A rolling stop was a rookie mistake, and she was no rookie. She knew arguing was pointless. It wasn't about the stop sign. It was about the test. He was baiting her, waiting for her to get angry, to give him an excuse to escalate. "I apologize if I did, officer," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I thought I came to a full stop." "Yeah, well, you thought wrong," Miller shot back. He walked back to his patrol car, leaving Maya in a simmering silence, punctuated by the flashing lights painting the trees in frantic strokes of red and blue. She watched him in her rearview mirror. He wasn't running her license. He was talking to Peterson, gesturing back at her car, a broad smile on his face. He was enjoying this. This was his theater. After a few minutes that stretched into an eternity, he sauntered back. "Well, Dr. Williams," he began, handing her back the documents. "Everything seems to be in order, but I'm getting a strange vibe from you. You seem nervous." "I'm not nervous, officer. I'd just like to know if I'm receiving a ticket so I can be on my way." Miller's eyes narrowed. Her composure was irritating him. It was a denial of his power. "A little jumpy, maybe? Got something in the car you don't want me to see? We've had a lot of drug activity moving through these nice neighborhoods lately. People who don't belong here, bringing their problems with them." The implication was clear, hanging in the air like poison. "You don't belong here." "I have nothing illegal in my vehicle, officer," Maya stated, her voice a shade colder. "You mind if I take a look?" he asked, but the tone made it a declaration. "Just to be sure." Am I being detained or am I free to go? She asked, using the precise, legally significant language. This was a line in the sand. Miller's face darkened. He had wanted acquiescence, not a challenge, however polite. You know what? I think I smell marijuana, he said, a lie so flimsy it was transparent. That gives me probable cause. Step out of the car, ma'am. A cold, controlled anger tightened in Maya's chest. This was a classic illegal escalation, but her mission was paramount. Causing a scene, revealing herself over a bogus traffic stop, would compromise a 6-month multi-agency operation. She had to swallow this. She had to play the part of the victim. Step out of the car, he repeated, his voice louder now, harder. Maya took a deep breath, unbuckled her seatbelt, and did as he said. She stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, as Miller began his search. He was deliberately rough. He ripped open the glove compartment, scattering papers on the passenger seat. He pulled down the visors, ran his hands aggressively under the seats. He wasn't searching. He was violating the space, punishing her for her calm, for her nice car, for her very presence. The true humiliation came when he went to the trunk. He had her open it, revealing a single briefcase containing her academic materials. He unzipped it and dumped the contents onto the pavement. Papers, pens, and a copy of Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism scattered across the dirty asphalt. Whoops, Miller said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Slippery fingers. Peterson, who had been watching silently, finally shifted his weight. Miller, maybe that's enough, he muttered, his voice low. Relax, Peterson. Just doing a thorough job, Miller retorted, kicking one of the papers with the toe of his boot. Gotta be thorough. Maya looked at the scattered pages of her research. She looked at Miller's smug face, a mask of petty tyranny. She looked at Peterson, who quickly averted his gaze, ashamed but complicit. And in that moment, she made a decision. Officer Kevin Miller was no longer just a racist cop on a power trip. He was now a person of interest. She knelt, her movements graceful and unhurried, and began to gather her papers. She didn't say a word. Her silence was more powerful than any protest. It was the silence of a predator that has just identified its mark. Miller, finally satisfied that he had broken her, wrote a ticket for the phantom rolling stop and slapped it into her hand. You have a nice day now, Professor, he said, turning his back on her and walking away. As the squad car pulled away, Maya stood up, the ticket clutched in her hand. She watched them go, her eyes cold and analytical. Miller thought he had won. He thought he had put a black woman in her place. He had no idea he had just stepped into the crosshairs of a federal investigation and personally handed Special Agent Maya Roberts the one thing she needed most, a reason to look directly at him. The temporary FBI field office, or the Garden as the agents called it, was located in the anonymous gray space of a suburban office park 10 miles outside Oak Creek. It was a world away from the tree-lined streets of the north side. Inside, the air hummed with the quiet intensity of servers and the low murmur of focused professionals. There were no windows, only walls covered in maps, suspect charts, and interconnected webs of data. Maya walked in an hour after the traffic stop, the fraudulent ticket still in her briefcase. The humiliation had been replaced by a chilling focus. She strode past her team members, nodding curtly, and went straight to the office of Special Agent in Charge, David Chen. Chen was a veteran of the Bureau, a man whose calm demeanor belied a mind that was constantly 10 steps ahead of everyone else. He was wiry, sharp, and had a reputation for seeing the whole board, not just the next move. He looked up from a file as Maya entered, his eyes immediately registering the storm behind her calm expression. Report, he said, steepling his fingers. Maya stood before his desk and recounted the incident, not with emotion, but with the detached precision of an intelligence report. She detailed Miller's pretext for the stop, his condescending language, the illegal search based on a fabricated smell of marijuana, the destruction of her property, and the complicit silence of his partner, Officer Peterson. When she finished, Chen was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the wall map of Oak Creek, crisscrossed with lines marking patrol routes and incident locations. Did you get the unit number? His name? Unit 27, Officer Kevin Miller. Badge number 714, Maya recited from memory. His partner was Peterson, first name unknown for now. And you're certain the stop was pretextual? 100%, Maya affirmed. He saw a black woman in an expensive car in a white neighborhood and decided to exercise his authority. It was textbook harassment. Chen nodded slowly. On its own, it's an internal affairs complaint. A black mark on his record, maybe a suspension if we push it. But it's a distraction from Cerberus. I don't think it is a distraction, Maya countered, her voice firm. I think it might be a doorway. Chen raised an eyebrow. Explain. For 6 months, we've been looking for Cerberus from the top down, Maya began, pacing the small office. We've been analyzing financial records of the top brass, looking for big payouts, offshore accounts. We've been tracking the movements of the known traffickers, trying to see which command-level officers are in their pocket. We're looking for a king, but what if Cerberus isn't a single person? What if it's not a king, but a network of pawns, gatekeepers on the street level? She leaned forward, her hands on his desk. This guy, Miller. The arrogance was off the charts. It wasn't just bigotry, David. It was a sense of absolute impunity. He acted like a man who knows he's untouchable, who has no fear of repercussions for anything he does. Why? A 15-year veteran isn't that reckless unless he feels protected. Chen's eyes narrowed in thought. You're suggesting his corruption might go deeper than racial harassment. I'm suggesting that the kind of officer who is comfortable fabricating probable cause to illegally search a vehicle is the same kind of officer who would be comfortable looking the other way on a drug shipment for a couple $1,000s in an envelope, Maya argued. The traffickers don't necessarily need the chief of police in their pocket. They just need the guys on the street, the Millers of the world, guys who control a specific beat at a specific time. And the location, he stopped me 3 blocks from the Old Wharf district. That's one of the primary routes our intel suggests the traffickers are using. The theory hung in the air, potent and plausible. They had been hunting a lion, but the problem might be a pack of hyenas. Chen stood up and walked to the main board, picking up a dry erase marker. Officer Kevin Miller, he wrote in a new empty section. Let's dig. I want everything. Financials, service record, commendations, complaints, especially complaints that were dismissed. I want to know who his friends are on the force, who he drinks with, who his past partners were, and get a name on Peterson. He was complicit, but he was also hesitant. He might be a weak link we can exploit. He turned to face Maya. You're now lead on a sub-investigation into Miller, but you are to remain in your cover as Ania Williams. You are not to engage with him directly. Your team will do the digging. You continue to be the academic. But now, he said, a grim smile touching his lips, your research has a new, very specific focus. Maya felt a surge of cold, clean purpose. The humiliation she had endured was no longer a personal affront. It was a tool. Miller, in his blind arrogance, had invited her in. He thought he was teaching her a lesson, but he had just enrolled himself in a masterclass on consequences. The board had changed. A new piece was in play, and the hunter had unknowingly walked into the crosshairs of a far more patient and dangerous predator. The search for Cerberus now had a face. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in covert intelligence gathering. While Maya maintained her cover as Dr. Ania Williams, attending lectures and spending long, visible hours in the university library, her team at The Garden descended on Officer Kevin Miller's life like a silent, invisible storm. They started with the official records. Miller's file at the OCPD was, on the surface, exemplary. Several commendations for bravery, a solid arrest record, 15 years of steady service. But beneath the polished surface, there were cracks. The team's analysts, experts at finding signal and noise, flagged a pattern. Miller had over 24 citizen complaints filed against him over his career for excessive force, illegal searches, and verbal abuse. The vast majority of the complainants were minorities, and every single complaint had been dismissed by the Internal Affairs Division, often with a cursory note, "Officer acted within department guidelines." It was a wall of institutional protection. Next came the financials. This was where the cracks deepened into fissures. Miller's official salary was $78,000 a year. His wife was a part-time preschool teacher. They had 2 children in private school, a mortgage on a house well above their pay grade in a gated community, and 2 late-model SUVs. They took a Caribbean cruise every year. The math didn't add up. The FBI's forensic accountants began to peel back the layers of his financial onion. They found a series of regular cash deposits into a savings account, always just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. They traced a boat, a 28-foot Sea Ray, registered not to Miller, but to his brother-in-law, a plumber who officially had a declared income of $45,000 a year. The slip fees at the marina were paid in cash. While the money trail was being mapped, another agent focused on his partner, Officer Peterson. His first name was Luke. He was 26, 3 years on the force, and clean as a whistle. His file was thin, his record unblemished. He lived in a small apartment and drove a used Honda. Surveillance showed he was a quiet kid who cared for his ailing mother. He was the perfect picture of a young, impressionable cop paired with a seasoned veteran. He was a follower, not a leader. He was their pressure point. Maya reviewed the daily reports from her team. A picture of Miller was emerging. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a greedy, bitter man who felt the world owed him something. He was a bully who leveraged his badge for power and profit. The working theory became clearer. Miller, and likely a handful of others like him, were the street-level facilitators. They weren't planning the drug shipments, but they were being paid to ensure specific patrol zones were clear at specific times. They were the ones who would handle any unexpected interference, like nosy residents or, ironically, honest cops who might stumble onto a handoff. They were the grunts of the conspiracy, and Miller's arrogance came from the protection he thought he had from the bigger players. The breakthrough came from a seemingly unrelated piece of surveillance. For weeks, the FBI had been monitoring a suspected stash house in an industrial park near the wharf. The same wharf Maya had been driving near on the day of the traffic stop. They had a camera on the building, tracking comings and goings. One night, an analyst flagged a familiar vehicle, OCPD Unit 27. The footage was grainy, but undeniable. Miller's squad car, on patrol, slowed as it passed the warehouse. It didn't stop. It didn't do anything overtly suspicious. But then, for precisely 90 seconds, the car's forward-facing camera and audio feed went dead. It was a tiny blip in the system, easily explained away as a momentary technical glitch. But the FBI's tech team knew better. The system hadn't glitched. It had been manually, temporarily disabled. 90 seconds later, the feed flickered back to life, and Unit 27 continued on its patrol. He was signaling, Maya said, watching the footage in the darkened control room with Chen. He drove by to show the traffickers the coast was clear, and he killed his dash cam for that brief window, so there would be no record of him loitering or communicating with anyone at the location. It's a pattern, Chen agreed, pointing to a log. We cross-referenced the time of that camera outage with known shipment dates from our informants. It's a match. He's their lookout. They now had a direct, tangible link between Miller and the drug operation. The arrogant street cop who humiliated a woman over a non-existent traffic violation was a key cog in a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The net was tightening. The plan shifted. Catching Miller was no longer enough. They had to use him as a ladder to climb up to the bigger targets. They needed to catch him in the act, in a way that would force him to either face decades in federal prison or give up the name of his contact, the name of the person who paid him, the name that might lead them to Cerberus. They decided to orchestrate a phantom drug shipment. They would leak false information through a trusted informant that a massive, high-value shipment was coming in on a specific night. They would make sure Miller was on duty and assigned to that patrol zone. The goal was to have him perform his signaling duties, but this time, the FBI would be the audience. The final piece was Officer Peterson. Maya knew they couldn't leave him in the car with Miller during the sting. He was a wild card. They needed to neutralize him, or better yet, flip him. Chen authorized a soft approach. 2 agents from the Bureau's Public Corruption Unit paid a visit to Luke Peterson's apartment. They didn't threaten him. They laid out the facts. They showed him the financial evidence against Miller. They showed him the surveillance footage of the dash cam going dead. They told him he was standing at a crossroads. He could continue to be complicit and go down with a sinking ship, facing charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Or he could be a police officer, an officer who upheld the law, and tell them everything he knew. They offered him a deal: cooperate fully, and they would recommend no charges be filed, ensuring he could save his career and his future. The young officer, overwhelmed and visibly terrified, crumbled. He confirmed everything. Miller would receive a text message with a time and a location. His job was to patrol that area during the given window and handle any problems. In exchange, he'd find an envelope with $5,000 cash in his gym locker the next day. He admitted he knew it was wrong, but he was intimidated by Miller and afraid to speak up. With Peterson's cooperation secured, the trap was set. The date for the phantom shipment was locked in. Officer Kevin Miller was about to work his last shift, and Special Agent Maya Roberts was preparing for the final act of a play that he had unwittingly written for himself. The night of the sting was cold and starless. A blanket of damp gray stretched over Oak Creek. A light mist slicked the streets of the industrial park near the wharf, making the asphalt gleam under the sparsely sodium lamps. To a casual observer, the area was deserted, home only to sleeping warehouses and the ghosts of forgotten industry. In reality, it was alive. Over 30 FBI agents were in position, a silent, invisible web closing in on Warehouse 17B. Sniper lookout teams were on the roofs of adjacent buildings, their high-powered optics cutting through the gloom. Tactical teams were staged in unmarked vans a block away, ready to move in on a single command. In a mobile command center disguised as a plumbing contractor's truck, Maya Roberts and David Chen watched a bank of monitors, their faces illuminated by the green and gray glow of night vision and thermal imaging. "All teams in position," a voice crackled in Maya's earpiece. "Asset is en route." The asset was a black panel van driven by an undercover FBI agent playing the role of the trafficker's transport. It contained a dummy shipment, bricks of flour and baking soda, but with a real GPS tracker in everyone. "Target is mobile," another agent reported. "Unit 27 is entering the perimeter, 2 minutes out." On one of the screens, Maya watched a live feed from a hidden pole camera. The familiar OCPD squad car came into view, cruising slowly down the desolate street. Inside, Kevin Miller was alone. Officer Peterson had, per the FBI's instructions, called in sick, his shift covered by an officer who was then officially reassigned at the last minute, leaving Miller to ride solo, a common enough occurrence that it wouldn't raise suspicion. Miller was calm, confident. He was on the verge of making an easy $5,000. All he had to do was drive a 3-block loop for an hour. It was the easiest money in the world. As Unit 27 approached Warehouse 17B, Maya leaned closer to the monitor. "Watch his dash cam feed," she whispered. On schedule, precisely as he passed the warehouse, the feed on Monitor 6, a direct tap into the OCPD's system, went black. "Dashcam is down," the tech agent confirmed. "He just signaled." "The buyer is moving in," Chen said, nodding towards another screen. A second vehicle, a dark sedan driven by another undercover agent playing the role of the buyer, pulled up to the warehouse loading bay. The panel van parked beside it. 2 agents dressed as criminals got out and began to unload the dummy cargo. The scene was set. They were giving Miller the illusion that everything was going according to plan. Miller completed his first pass and looped around the block. His job now was to keep the area sterile. He was the guard dog. And then the FBI introduced the catalyst. A third vehicle, a beat-up Ford pickup, entered the street. This was also an FBI vehicle, driven by an agent playing the part of a random citizen who had taken a wrong turn. The truck sputtered, backfired, and rolled to a stop right in front of the warehouse, its hazard lights blinking pathetically. In the command center, Maya watched Miller's reaction on the surveillance feed. The squad car, which had been a block away, immediately sped up. This was the problem he was paid to handle. Miller pulled up behind the stalled truck, his headlights bathing it in a harsh glare. He got out of his car, the same arrogant swagger in his step, even in the darkness. "You're on a private road, pal," Miller barked at the undercover agent in the truck. "You need to move this thing now." "Sorry, officer, she just died on me," the agent replied, playing the part of a flustered driver. "I think it's the alternator." "I don't care if it's the flux capacitor. Get it out of here," Miller snapped, his eyes darting nervously toward the warehouse where the drug deal was happening. He was getting agitated. This wasn't part of the plan. I can't. It won't start. Maybe you could give me a hand or call a tow, the agent pleaded. No, Miller said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. He put his hand on his weapon. I'm telling you one last time. Get this piece of junk moving, or I'm going to haul you out of it and arrest you for obstruction. This was it, the moment of truth. Miller wasn't just clearing the way, he was actively and criminally protecting a drug transaction, using his authority and the threat of violence to do so. Okay, I'll try again, the agent in the truck said, holding up his hands. It was the prearranged takedown signal. All teams, execute, Chen said, his voice calm and clear. The night exploded. From the darkness, the world came alive with light and sound. The doors of the unmarked vans flew open, and tactical agents swarmed the area. High-intensity floodlights on the rooftops ignited, turning the misty street into a daylight scene. The command FBI, show me your hands, echoed from a dozen different directions. Miller froze, his hand still on his gun, his face a perfect portrait of shock and disbelief. He whipped his head around, seeing the agents closing in on the dealers at the warehouse, then seeing another team moving directly towards him. His brain couldn't process it. It was a setup. It was all a setup. He was paralyzed by confusion, his mind frantically trying to find an explanation, a way out. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape that didn't exist. He was a rat in a maze, and all the walls had just snapped shut at once. And then, from the mobile command center, two figures emerged, walking calmly into the center of the chaos. David Chen, and beside him, Special Agent Maya Roberts. She had removed the wig she wore as Anaya, her professional, no-nonsense FBI haircut now visible. She was wearing a black tactical vest with the bold yellow letters FBI emblazoned across the front. She walked directly towards Officer Kevin Miller. As Maya approached, the chaos of the raid seemed to fade into a focused, silent tunnel around her and Officer Miller. The tactical agents had already disarmed the dealers and the buyer, all of whom were now on their knees, hands behind their heads, playing their roles to the very end. But the real drama was unfolding under the harsh glare of the floodlights on the wet asphalt. Miller stood frozen, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension, then to stark, undiluted terror. He looked at the FBI vest on Maya, then at her face. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but his mind refused to accept what it was seeing. It was the woman from the traffic stop, the professor, the sociologist, the person he had belittled, lied to, and humiliated. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smug, condescending bully was gone, replaced by a stunned, pathetic shell of a man. The power dynamic between them had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. Maya stopped a few feet from him. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Her expression was one of cool, dispassionate professionalism, which was somehow more devastating than any display of anger could have been. Officer Kevin Miller, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the night air. You are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances and receiving bribes in performance of your official duties. She held up a pair of handcuffs. Put your hands behind your back. Miller just stared at her, his mind reeling. But the traffic stop, he stammered, the words tumbling out. You're Special Agent Maya Roberts, FBI, she finished for him, her voice flat. The traffic stop was your audition. You passed with flying colors. You showed us exactly what kind of officer you were. You just didn't realize who you were performing for. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step. The entire investigation, this whole nightmare, had started because of him, because of his own petty prejudice and arrogance. He had been so sure of his power, so certain of her powerlessness, that he had personally invited the federal government to scrutinize his life. He had handed the lioness the key to his cage. No, he whispered. It was a rolling stop. There was no rolling stop, Kevin, Maya said, using his first name with a chilling familiarity. There was no smell of marijuana. There was just you, a corrupt officer abusing your authority. And you were so proud of it, You never imagined your victim might be in a position to do anything about it. Now turn around. The fight drained out of him completely. The bravado, the swagger, the years of feeling untouchable. It all evaporated into the misty night. He was just a man in a costume whose fantasy had come to a brutal end. He slowly turned, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As Maya snapped the cold steel of the handcuffs around his wrists, the click echoed in the sudden silence. She cinched them tight. This wasn't just procedure. This was karma. The hands that had dumped her papers onto the dirty street were now bound. The man who had illegally searched her car was now in federal custody. From the shadows near the command truck, another figure emerged. Officer Luke Peterson, flanked by 2 agents. He was wearing civilian clothes, his face pale and drawn. He looked at his former partner. The man he had feared and followed, now brought low. Their eyes met for a moment. In Miller's, there was betrayal. In Peterson's, there was a mixture of fear, regret, and a flicker of relief. "You!" Miller spat at Peterson, his voice raspy. "You sold me out." Peterson just shook his head and looked away, unable to speak. Maya began to read Miller his Miranda rights, her voice a calm, steady metronome, marking the end of his career and his freedom. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Each word was a nail in the coffin of his old life. He wasn't just losing his job, he was losing everything. His house, his boat, his pension, his reputation, his liberty. All of it, traded away for a few $1,000s in an envelope and the fleeting, pathetic thrill of bullying a woman he thought was beneath him. As 2 tactical agents took custody of Miller to lead him to a transport vehicle, he looked back at Maya one last time. "Why?" he asked, his voice cracking. "All of this? For a traffic stop?" Maya looked him directly in the eye. "No," she said, her voice devoid of any pity. "This is for the person you would have pulled over tomorrow. And the day after that. This is for everyone who didn't have a badge to back them up. The traffic stop just opened the door. You built the prison yourself." He had no reply. As they led him away, his head bowed, Officer Kevin Miller finally understood. The worst mistake he ever made wasn't pulling her over. It was underestimating her. The aftermath of the sting operation did not descend quietly upon Oak Creek. It arrived like a thunderclap in the dead of night, followed by a seismic shock wave that radiated from the damp, greasy asphalt of the industrial park to the highest offices of City Hall. In the immediate moments after Kevin Miller was led away in disgrace, a profound and professional silence fell over the scene. The chaos of the raid was replaced by the meticulous, quiet work of federal agents processing evidence. The flashing takedown lights gave way to the steady, impartial glow of portable work lamps. Each flash of a forensic camera, each numbered evidence marker placed on the ground, was another nail in the coffin of the Cerberus network. Special Agent Maya Roberts stood beside David Chen near the mobile command center, the adrenaline of the night slowly ebbing away, replaced by a cold, clear sense of finality. She watched her team work with the seamless efficiency of a well-oiled machine. They had done it. They had cut the head off a snake. "He never saw it coming," Chen said, his voice low as he watched the agents. "He was so blinded by his own prejudice, he couldn't see the world as it was, only as he thought it should be. You used his greatest weakness as our greatest weapon. He handed us the weapon himself, David," Maya replied, her gaze distant. "He loaded it, and he pointed it at his own operation. All I did was pull the trigger." She thought of the condescending smirk on Miller's face, the casual cruelty with which he dumped her papers. It felt like a lifetime ago. That personal insult had become the key that unlocked a citywide conspiracy. The thought brought her no joy, only a grim satisfaction. The fight was won, but the war was far from over. The next morning, the shockwave hit the Oak Creek Police Department headquarters. News of the FBI raid and Miller's arrest had been tightly contained overnight, but now it spread through the precinct like a virus. Officers gathered in hushed, nervous clusters, speaking in whispers, avoiding eye contact. The air was thick with fear and suspicion. Who else was involved? Who would be next? Every officer with even a slightly tarnished reputation felt a cold dread seeping into their bones. At precisely 9 a.m., the glass doors to the precinct lobby slid open. David Chen and Maya Roberts entered, flanked by four other agents and, pointedly, the OCPD's own chief of police, a man whose face was a mask of grim resignation. He had been briefed an hour earlier and had understood the political reality. Cooperate completely or be consumed by the firestorm. They strode through the bullpen, their footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Desks fell quiet. Phone calls were cut short. The procession didn't stop until it reached the glass-walled office of Lieutenant Frank Reynolds. Reynolds, a man with a political smile and a predator's eyes, looked up from his computer, his expression of mild annoyance quickly dissolving into one of pure, unadulterated panic. He saw Chen. He saw the other agents. But then his eyes landed on Maya. He didn't recognize her, but he saw the look of cold purpose in her eyes, and he knew. "Frank Reynolds," Chen announced, his voice carrying across the entire floor. "You're under arrest on behalf of the United States government for conspiracy, bribery, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise." Two agents entered his office as Reynolds shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is insane. On what grounds?" he blustered, but the authority had vanished from his voice. He was just a man in a nice suit, trapped. "On the grounds of a full confession from your bagman, Officer Kevin Miller," Maya stated, her voice cutting through his protests. "He's been in our custody since 2 a.m. He's told us everything about the payments, the schedule, the burner phones. He gave you up to save himself." The mention of Miller's name broke him. The fight visibly drained from Reynolds' body, replaced by the limp posture of the utterly defeated. He sank back into his chair as the agents cuffed him, his political smile now a slack-jawed grimace of despair. As they led him through the bullpen, past the officers he had commanded and corrupted, a few of his cronies looked away in fear, but many more watched with a grim satisfaction. The cancer that had been poisoning their department was finally being cut out. Miller's interrogation had been a textbook case of a bully's collapse. Seated in a cold, featureless room in the federal building, stripped of his uniform, his badge, and his bravado, he was a hollowed-out man. He had initially tried to bluster, to deny everything, but the two FBI interrogators simply laid out the evidence in silent, damning piles on the table in front of him. Financial records, surveillance photos, a sworn affidavit from Luke Peterson. Finally, a high-definition photo of Miller's squad car, dash cam off, lingering beside the warehouse. "The case against you is ironclad, Kevin," the lead agent told him, his voice conversational. "You're facing a minimum of 25 years. You'll be in your 70s when you get out. Your kids will be grown. Your wife will have moved on. Or," he paused, letting the weight of the words sink in, "you can help yourself. We don't need your testimony to convict you. But a federal judge might look kindly on your full and immediate cooperation when it comes to sentencing. We want the head. You're just a hand. Give us Reynolds and you might see your children again before they have children of their own." Faced with the utter annihilation of his life, Miller broke. The confession came not in a flood, but in a pathetic, self-pitying trickle. He painted himself as a victim, a guy just trying to make ends meet, who got drawn into something over his head. But amidst the excuses, he gave them everything. Names, dates, locations, the entire operational structure of the Cerberus network. He laid it all out, a detailed roadmap of his own corruption, all in a desperate bid to claw back a few years of his ruined life. The public fallout was immense. The media frenzy was even greater than the FBI had anticipated. "FBI agents traffic stop unravels police corruption ring," blared the headline of the Oak Creek Sentinel. Maya's story, though she herself remained officially anonymous and gave no interviews, became a local legend. The humiliated professor was a symbol of a deeper truth. It was a story that resonated powerfully with the city's minority communities, who for years had told stories of harassment by officers like Miller, only to be dismissed or disbelieved. Town hall meetings became standing room only events, with citizens standing up one after another, newly emboldened to voice their experiences and demand systemic change. The Department of Justice, seizing on the momentum, formally announced its patterns and practices investigation, promising to reform the OCPD from the ground up. For Miller, the karma was as thorough as it was merciless. His trial was a formality, He stood before the judge, a shell of his former self, and was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. His wife finalized their divorce before he was even transferred, ensuring she and their children were firewalled from the disgrace. The court-ordered asset forfeiture was a public spectacle. Federal marshals were photographed seizing his prized boat, the Miller Time, and towing away the two SUVs he had been so proud of. He lost his home, his family, his pension, his freedom, and the one thing he had valued most of all, the illusion of his own superiority. Luke Peterson, by contrast, was given a chance to rebuild. He testified truthfully before a grand jury and was granted immunity from prosecution. He quietly resigned from the OCPD, his dream of being a police officer tainted but not extinguished. Before he moved away, he had a final meeting with an FBI agent. "I knew it was wrong," Peterson confessed, his voice heavy with regret. "I saw how he was, but I was scared. I didn't want to ruin my career." The agent nodded. "You almost did, son, but you made the right choice in the end. It takes courage to fix a mistake. Go build a new career and be the kind of cop you were afraid to be." On her last day in Oak Creek, Maya Roberts sat in her unremarkable rental car across the street from the OCPD headquarters. She had already packed up her life as Ania Williams, the research sabbatical officially over. She watched as officers, some new, some familiar, went in and out of the building. The department was wounded, humbled, but it was on a path to healing, a path that would not have been possible without the initial, ugly confrontation. Her victory felt profound but incomplete. They had taken down Reynolds and his crew, but Maya knew that the system that created them, the culture of impunity, the us versus them mentality, the casual bigotry, was a far more resilient enemy. There were thousands of Kevin Millers in departments all across the country, but there were also thousands of Luke Petersons, young officers who just needed to see that doing the right thing was a viable choice. And she hoped there were a few more Mayas, watching, waiting, ready to turn an abuser's power back upon themselves. The traffic stop had been an insult, but it had led to a reckoning. It was a stark and powerful lesson. Sometimes the smallest crack in the pavement is all you need to bring the whole corrupt structure crashing down. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the abuse of power, no matter how small or casual it may seem, can unleash a chain of events with devastating consequences. Officer Miller thought he was making a simple power play on a quiet street, but his actions pulled on a thread that unraveled his entire life and exposed a deep-seated corruption. It shows us that true strength often lies not in loud aggression, but in quiet composure and unshakable integrity, as demonstrated by Special Agent Roberts. Justice and karma in this story weren't loud, explosive events, but the slow, inevitable result of one man's arrogance colliding with one woman's hidden strength. If this story of justice being served resonated with you, and you believe that accountability is paramount, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us reach more people. Share this video with someone who appreciates stories of karma and hidden strength. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for listening.